We are the Smith family from Crossroad Baptist Church in Ames, Iowa. We have spent most of the past 20 years in Kumamoto, Japan, and are currently based out of a 2007 Toyota Highlander somewhere in the South or Central United States. Pre-COVID-19 until early in 2020, the Smith family maintained a fairly busy and consistent schedule. Our Sundays consisted of 2 separate Bible studies in locations about an hour apart. A Sunday morning Bible study was held at one of our 2 coffee shops, Tomogokoro, in the small town of Minami-Aso, population 11,000. About 8 people attended faithfully. On Sunday evenings, we met in Kumamoto City, population 740,000, at Hilltop International Preschool, where a bilingual service was held for our international group. Music has been a big part of our family for years, and we participated in several music outreach opportunities, open mic nights, family band concerts, as well as hosting concerts at the coffee shops. Chloe taught a gospel choir class and a group guitar class, and Cameron taught a group ukulele class. Cameron and Melody fought through homeschool, while Chloe started online classes at Liberty University, studying Bible and counseling. All 3 children participated in full-contact karate, advancing through the belt levels, gaining courage and Japanese skills as they built relationships with the other participants. Norman and Susan traveled to Thailand to attend the Asia-Pacific Triennial Conference, plus receiving required ABWE security training. They also made a quick trip to Pennsylvania to attend a required Missionary Enrichment Conference. We saw some fruit from the international ministry as Jonathan Jelliff, an English teacher Norman was discipling, committed to enter full-time missions. Jonathan returned to the States to begin pre-field ministry in 2020. And then came COVID-19, bringing new challenges in 2020 and 2021. So many things came to a screeching halt. However, God opened new doors during this time. Hours before Japan's borders closed, Tom and Amy McVicker and their daughters Veronica and Abigail arrived in Japan for the first time as missionaries. They studied Japanese culture and got situated in Kumamoto. God taught them many things and used them while they were here. However, due to various circumstances, after a difficult first year, they decided to return to the States. With COVID restrictions hitting businesses, we were forced to close the Michishirube coffee shop. This was a rented storefront that needed to pay its own way, and fewer customers made it impossible to continue. Closing freed up extra time and resources. The second coffee shop, Tomogokoro, located in a building we own, no longer operates as a business, but is still used as a church meeting place. Our Sunday morning Bible study saw a drop in attendees, dwindling to 2 women, with whom Susan and Keiko began meeting. One of these women was a first-time attender who had been away from church for over a decade. Both ladies lived directly across the street from Tomogokoro. Sunday evenings turned into online Zoom meetings for much of the time during coronavirus season.
Western culture, so I was looking for that.
Norman was appointed the field team leader for ABWE Japan. This new role involves many responsibilities and opportunities for ministry. Leading the monthly ABWE Japan meetings is one responsibility which ended up being online for quite a while. Numerous Zoom calls with potential interns and new missionaries, strategic planning with the ABWE Japan team, conversations on opening Tokyo for ABWE missionaries as part of the Open Initiative, and mentoring younger missionaries within Japan who are independent and have no coworkers. These are just a few of the pieces that make up the new role. During the pandemic, Norman received training in coaching and in collaborative citywide ministry. Under Norman's leadership, ABWE joined a fellowship of missionaries called JEMA, Japan Evangelical Missionary Association, with the goal of encouraging each other and reaching the unreached in Japan. In 2020, Norman capitalized on some free time to initiate a major fundraising event supporting an orphanage in India. He created the KO 100 Ultramarathon, during which he ran a total of 83 miles in 30 hours and raised about $10,000. After praying continually for an opportunity to reach out to the number of Filipino men in our community, Norman finally ran into one. Literally, they were jogging. Meeting Elijah has been a highlight of our past term. The son of a Baptist pastor in the Philippines, Elijah had not been discipled. When offered the chance to learn and grow, Elijah eagerly accepted and has been meeting with Norman weekly ever since. He began taking classes with Norman through the Kumamoto Bible School, and though English is not his best language, he knows 7, he has worked hard to improve in all areas. We have been thrilled to witness his embracing of Bible truths and his dedication to sharing everything he's learned with his coworkers, family, and friends. Elijah led his friend Eric to the Lord in 2021. Eric was baptized shortly after. Elijah is serious about his role in teaching his disciple, as he calls Eric. They meet weekly, going through the major stories and events in the entire Bible. Another highlight during this time is with our son Cameron. He began taking Bible school classes along with Elijah. He made the decision to be baptized and has taken on new responsibilities as part of his ongoing training and discipleship. One of these is leading a discipleship study with a friend of his. Cameron was dual enrolled at Faith Baptist Bible College for his senior year of high school. There is always a shortage of good Bible study resources in Japanese. With a little extra time and energy due to the slower pace during the pandemic, Susan and Keiko began translating small circle Bible study material. They finished the first draft and Chloe typeset it. Pray for this ongoing project to be used by God to lead many to Christ and help them grow as disciples. The jobs that Chloe had pre-COVID all closed down suddenly in 2020. With her extra time, she earnestly began working on her new venture as a singer-songwriter. She has crafted over 100 songs. Much of her music is written from a Christian perspective and encourages listeners to think more deeply about life. Cameron and Melody both became dog owners during this time. Their interest in dog training has grown, and they are both considering pursuing dog training as a vocation. Fritz and Zulu are much-loved additions to the Smith family. 2022 brought some return to normal in much of the world, but oh so slowly in Japan. All throughout the pandemic, Norman continued to meet with his International Men's Discipleship Group each week at a restaurant. God has been at work in these men's lives. Jonathan Jelliff was a regular, and another member, Nathan Stratton, has also made steps toward full-time ministry as a pastor of a local church. Pray for this group of internationals from multiple countries as they seek to be godly husbands and fathers, as well as leaders in their church and community. As COVID settled down, Norman helped organize the first ever Gemma meetings in Kyushu, one each in Kumamoto and Fukuoka. Interacting with like-minded missionaries is an opportunity for personal refreshment, encouragement, exchange of ideas, and interconnection. On May 4th, we held a multi-church one-day retreat, with 4 different churches participating. After learning and discussing together about forgiveness and repentance within our relationships, one lady commented, "We should study the Bible like this at church." On Sunday mornings in 2022, Susan and Melody met with the ladies at Minamiaso, and Norman and Cameron visited several area churches, 3 of which are without a pastor. This is a growing need in Japan. Pray for men to be saved, discipled, and called into ministry. Norman seeks to encourage and help out however he can. Chloe began attending Kamoto Christ Church, taking steps to be more on her own and able to serve in a new way. It's great for improving her Japanese, too. Our Sunday evenings are now held at North Kumamoto Bible Christ Church. We rent their buildings for our International Bible Study at 5 p.m. every Sunday. On one of our last Sundays in Japan, May 29, Elijah and Cameron both shared their first sermon as part of fulfilling their coursework for their homiletics class at the Kumamoto Bible School. Elijah is prayerfully considering full-time Christian ministry. Norman introduced him to the head of PABWE, an ABWE sister sending mission agency in the Philippines. Elijah is considering pastoral ministry, or perhaps even returning to Japan as a missionary to the Filipino population. Currently, Elijah is leading 2 dorm Bible studies with his coworkers. He started Christ's Army Ministry, an online outreach with the intent of discipling the young people in the Philippines. Most of them belong to his father's church or a sister church. Elijah's sisters there also help with organizing this new ministry. The young adults in this ministry have since begun 2 children's programs to reach out with the gospel to the many children in their area of Palawan. In a desire to make use of the time and use his gifts well, Norman began a podcast called Run with Horses. Susan joins him on the marriage edition, and Chloe and Cameron have added their insight during the family edition. We pray God will use this time of sharing with others what God has taught us over the years. So what's next? As we look forward to returning to Japan in January 2023, we have some new prospects in mind. Both Cameron and Melody will be taking online classes at Faith Baptist Bible College in the spring, while Chloe will move to Tokyo to attend Tokyo Christian University in the fall of 2023. Susan will be finished with homeschool for the first time in 15 years. Susan is excited for this new chapter of her life and ministry. Norman will continue on as the ABWE Japan Field Team Leader, which involves planning, meetings, training, pursuing relationships, and camp upkeep. Our role with Jonathan Jelliff is yet to be determined. He plans to minister in the Kumamoto area with us and is planning to marry Hazuki in the near future. We'd also like to continue helping the 3 area churches without pastors. They seem open and friendly toward us. One of the biggest changes may involve the ABWE Open Initiative in Tokyo. ABWE wants to see a new work open up there with a new team of ABWE missionaries, and Norman is to lead the charge. He has been building relationships and laying groundwork for future partnerships, but more of this is needed. At some point, Norman and Susan may need to move part-time to Tokyo to aid in starting a team there. With Japan's borders closed to tourists and new visas, we were unable to host any interns or short-termers for the past several years. However, God continues to stir up interest in Japan, and we hope to see some new workers arrive soon. The need is great, the time is short. Is God calling you?
Morning. Are most of you awake? Some of you are awake. Well, hopefully we'll do our part to wake the rest of you up before it's time to go. It is good to be with you this morning. I don't know exactly when the last time we were here. It's been a while. We were supposed to come back in 2020, but something was going on that year, and we just weren't able to travel and get around very much. So it's good to be here today. I'm going to try to give you a little overview of what you would have seen in the video and connect that some with some scripture and a message I wanted to share with you this morning. But I think there's four main things really in this last 5 years. It's been at least 5 years since we were back in the States, that as we were in Japan, we were working on or with. And if you read our prayer letters, all of these things would have come up at various times, or at least most of them would. And maybe one of them is really looking toward the future too. But there are four main areas. One of them, in 2019, I became the field team leader for ABW Japan, and that added a lot to busyness and a lot of administrative tasks and things like that. But that's not why I accepted the role. They had offered me or requested that I take it at least 2 times before I said yes. And I'm not really an administrator or a bureaucrat, so the first time they asked, I said, not a chance. Thank you, no thanks. And the second time, they asked and said, will you pray about it? It's like, oh. Okay, well, if you're going to put it that way, I said, yes, I'll agree to pray about it, but there's still not a chance, but I'll pray about it, and I'll even talk to our home church pastor. So I did pray about it and talk to our pastor, and he said, well, is there an opportunity to disciple newer missionaries and to kind of change the direction of the mission in Japan? I said, well, maybe, probably. Are you saying that I need to pray about this more? I ended up taking the role finally on the third time. So the reason I took it is not because of the bureaucracy and the administration. There are valuable roles there, but because it is an opportunity to work with newer missionaries. And as I put out prayer requests, one thing I want you to continue to pray for is that there will be more missionaries coming to Japan, more workers. That is our number one need. Whether it's Japanese pastors, workers in the church, or missionaries, our number one need is new workers, or more help. Most of the missionaries that work in Japan that I know work by themselves. We'd like to work with a team, but there is no team. There's no group of people to work with. So most of us work by ourselves for years at a time with a little to no fellowship outside of occasional, maybe quarterly, up to 6 or 8 times a year, get together with other missionaries and pastors and fellowship a little bit. There's not a lot. That is a huge, huge need. In addition to just the work on the ground every week to have coworkers. So one of the parts, the reason I took this role as field team leader is because you do have an opportunity to work with newer missionaries and really encourage them. And my heart and my message this morning is really my role, and I think our role, every one of us as followers of Jesus, is to be disciple makers. That's why I took the role. There's an opportunity to disciple newer missionaries, to help them have that understanding. This is what you're supposed to be. This is what it looks like to be a missionary. I know I've said before, and most of the time we think about missionaries, we think of the term church planter, and that's not inaccurate, but it is incomplete. Really, the heart should be to be a disciple maker. The way that you are a church planter is to make disciples. And where we make disciples, there will be a church. But you can have that flipped around and say, well, my goal is to be a church planter only. And you can start something that you can call a church. And I appreciate this morning, Pastor was talking about it in Sunday school, the church, it's not the building. We don't necessarily have to have a building. Often we talk about going to church. That is technically inaccurate. It's just flat out wrong. We are the church. If we met under a tree in the backyard, we would still be the church. There'd be nothing lacking in that. So it's wrong to say we're going to church, and I wish we could get away from that. It's how else you say it. We could go to the building where the church gathers. We can go to the church family. There's lots of ways we can put it. But if a missionary goes and their goal is to be a church planter and they have in their mind a building and this certain kind of gathering that has these certain things, a lot of times you can stop short. You can have that and still not be making disciples, which means it's not a biblical church. The church is meant to be a disciple-making factory. We're meant to be producing people who are following Jesus and who are able to reproduce that, and that's what my message is going to be about in a little bit. So I took that role as field team leader for that reason, and I have had opportunities to talk to people who are planning to be missionaries, and I'm encouraging lots of younger missionaries. That's been part of my role for the last couple of years, and that's one of the things I want you to pray for me about going forward. We do need new workers, and we need new workers who really have the heart to follow Christ and to stick with it when it's difficult. Japan is one of those countries. When we went there, it was called a burial ground for missionaries. In our time in Japan, in 20 years, only one new family has made it, and 3 families have left with ABWE. And that's the trajectory of most mission boards in Japan. It is difficult, and people say, why is it difficult? It's not like going to a third world country where physically it's hard to live there. It's easy to live there. You can get a lot of what you need. There are certain kinds of food you're not going to be able to get, but Japanese food's awesome. It's a great place to live. But spiritually, in ministry, it's very, very difficult. Why is that? It's not because it's dangerous. There are countries you can go to and you share the name of Jesus and your life is in danger. That's not true in Japan. So why is it so hard? It's because people don't care. And more and more, America is becoming this way. One of the things that I do quite often when I have a group of men, you get to know them, we'll be sitting around, a barbecue. Like I'd ride motorcycles and you have a group that would stop for coffee or have people to the house for a barbecue or something. You have a group of men, you sit and get to talk to them for a while. And I've done this on a college campus one time. I had 5 guys. They're all in their early 20s. They're sitting there, and I asked them, do you believe that there is a spiritual being of any kind? I mean, you define God however you want to define him. Do you believe that there's anything out there? All 5 of them said, I've never thought about it, and I don't know that it matters. And that's why it's so difficult in Japan. Because it's not that people have thought about it and decided, I don't think God's there. I've looked at the evidence and I don't believe. They've said, I don't think it matters. So you do whatever you want to do. I don't care. That's where Japan is. 75% of the people are agnostic. They will say, if you ask them that they're Buddhist, but you ask them, what do you believe? They don't believe anything. They believe that you need to get a job and work, although that's becoming like America too. A lot of people don't want to do that either. They don't care. And when you talk to somebody, think about all of the methods of sharing the gospel that you know, and all the conversations that you can imagine about God, about Jesus. They rely on the other people having some level of interest or seeing that this is relevant to something in their life. And most Japanese have cited, it's not really relevant to my life, so I don't care. So when we are starting in Japan, any conversations, we're looking at starting at the beginning, it's important. The fact that God exists is important. It's relevant to your life. A lot of things that you are struggling with, there's a direct connection to the fact that God exists and your problem and your solution to your problem. Why is it that Japan is one of the highest suicide rates in the world, one of the highest depression rates in the world? Some of that is because there's no hope. Well, why is there no hope? Well, because there's no God. Because it doesn't matter. It's easy to look at things like suicide and say, well, yeah, my life doesn't matter. If God doesn't exist, if your life has no meaning and purpose, then yeah, dead or alive, it doesn't matter. If there's nothing else out there. But if God does exist, then there's cause for hope. There's a reason to consider who God is and what God has said. So that's why Japan's hard. So we need coworkers who are willing to go to a hard place and ask hard questions. One of the things that I often share when we talk about ministry in Japan, language is important. Defining words is important. So like we said church, it's important that we define church. If we're going to keep using that word, we need to define church, and it needs to not include the building. It needs to include what God said that church is, not what we want it to be. Well, in Japan, There are a lot of words that we need to share the gospel that are not really part of the culture. There's not really a word for sin. The word they use is actually literally defined as a crime. It's a man breaking man's laws. We have to redefine it, give it a second definition, to even talk about the idea of sin. There's not a word for accountability. We think about growing and being a disciple and working together to help each other to grow. Accountability is an important concept. Really, the concept is not even there. I've asked Japanese pastors, how can I explain this concept? And they're just really struggle to even explain the concept in Japanese. There's not a word for it. There are multiple things like that. Grace is not really an important concept in Japanese culture. Oh, that's really, really important for Christians. And we're talking about God and mercy and grace. This is really, really important. It's really hard to talk about those things in this culture. So it gets discouraging for missionaries, for pastors, for Christians to go, I can't even say what I want to say. It's a hard place. So pray for missionaries, pray for new workers, and pray for the right kind of workers. Workers who are sold out that this message is so important, it's worth the rest of my life to do whatever it takes to get this message clearly through to people. So field team leader is an important part of that for us. The second part we've had for years, we actually started as an international church in Japan. So multiple reasons for that. One, when we were there and we had kids and they only speak English, they didn't really speak Japanese to start with. So they needed English. So we would have Japanese and English. And it seems like God has always brought us at least one English teacher who's there for 2 or 3 years who needs an English-speaking church, and there just is not an international church in Kumamoto. So we've always kind of been that. So we've always had at least one person. Regularly we've gone, oh, hey, look, this person's going to leave, and then we're done. We can go back to just Japanese, and then God brings somebody else that needs English. So we just have really understood God wants us to have an international church in Japan. And then about 10 years ago, Susan met a Japanese lady, and through that relationship got to know her and found out her husband is American. And he apparently knows every foreigner that lives in Kumamoto. So we've never done intentional outreach for internationals, but through him we got to meet, he's American, started meeting with him on Saturdays doing just discipling him. And that was really awesome, by the way. If you would have seen our video, you would have seen his picture. He is now pastoring a church that's been without a pastor for about 10 years. He's now pastoring that church. When we met him, he was far away from God, but about 6 years of just regular ongoing discipleship. He's got 4 kids, and we think maybe that's the generation that's going to reach Japan. His kids are grown up there. Awesome. His name's Nathan Stratton. He is now pastoring a church there. After about 6 months, he said, hey, I've got a friend from Australia. Do you mind if he comes? Sure. So a friend from Australia comes. He's also married to a Japanese lady, and they have kids. Like, wow, I didn't know there were so many here. And after a while, hey, we've got a friend, and he's from Scotland. His wife's Japanese, and they've got kids. What is God doing? I did not realize all these people were here. God has continually brought us these people. So now we have an international men's discipleship group on Saturdays, and 2 of those men, Nathan is now pastoring a church. Jonathan, he's the only one that's single, but he's engaged to a Japanese lady. So he's supposed to get married next year. Jonathan is covering Furlough for us. He is now a full-time missionary in Japan. So God has been working in this international group. Now that's one of the exciting things about what's happening now. So the international ministry has done well, and you know what? The last 2 years, nothing has changed with the international ministry. No one was worried about coming or ever stopped coming. We met on Zoom just a little bit. But the Japanese language ministry, we had a Japanese church that was meeting Sunday morning that was Japanese only. It went from about 10 or 12 on a Sunday morning to 1 when we left in June of this year. So COVID absolutely wiped out the Japanese ministry. And there were things like one lady was a nurse, and her hospital told her, please don't get together with anyone outside of work. And so she followed that, and her family and kids. Her husband was not a believer, so completely removed him from the church, and just one thing after another, God, we just ended up taking away that ministry for the time being. So pray for us as we go back. One of our prayer requests looking at the next term is what do we need to do going forward? Where do we spend our time? The international church is going well. We have a lady from Jamaica. We've met, one of the things you would have seen in the video is a man named Elijah who is Filipino. We met him during COVID, right in the start, like in March or so of 2020. Find out he's the son of a Baptist pastor, but he'd never been discipled. So really quickly I asked him, hey, would you be interested in getting together? Started coming over once a week, and I shared with him, we had a Bible college, a Bible school, pre-COVID, but it's kind of shut down now, but would you be interested in studying? He said, yeah. So Cameron, our son Cameron, and Elijah started studying in this Bible school, and his plan was to go back to the Philippines and be a police officer. He had failed the test one time. He said, didn't really understand why, but he failed the test. He was going to come to Japan, work for a few years, and then go back and take the test. Earlier this year, he got a call from his uncle, said, hey, Elijah, we've got an in for you. His uncle was a police officer, said, we've got a space for you. You just need to come back. Your contract ends in, I think it was like June or something. Come back and you have your place in the police department. Elijah said, you know what, I'm not going to do that. God's called me to be in ministry. So Elijah's planning to be either a missionary in Japan to the internationals, or to go back and be a pastor in the Philippines. But he wanted to stay for another contract. He re-signed so that he could finish the Bible school. And he has led 2 of his co-workers to Christ in the last year. Elijah is working. He is on fire. So God is working in the international community in Japan. It's really interesting how we have in our mind what we want to do, and God is building his church. We have our plans, and God is ordering our steps. So we thank God for the way he's working. We also ask you to pray for us as we go back, that he would continue to guide our steps. So field team leader and the international church are 2 of the main things that take up a lot of time in our life. In both of those, I look at my main role as to be a disciple maker. My number 1 goal is to disciple men to be leaders in the church, because wherever they are, and they're leading in their family, and they're reaching out to their neighbors and friends, there will be churches. And we're seeing that as Elijah has started now a Filipino a church in Tagalog, basically, on Sunday mornings, and they're meeting. We're pouring into Elijah, and he's pouring into people who don't speak English. That's the way the church grows. So there may be eventually a Filipino church in Kumoto, and it'll be because we've discipled Elijah, and he's turning around and he's discipling his fellow countrymen. The other big thing that I want you to pray for, and pray with us as we go back, there are now an increasing number of churches in Japan that don't have pastors, and they're expecting in the next about 15 years, somewhere between 1/3 and half of the churches may be without a pastor. Now, this is a huge problem, and it goes back to the importance of what I wanted to talk about today, is the need to be making disciples. Where do pastors and deacons and Sunday school teachers come from? It comes from us, the church, doing our job of making disciples. It's starting with our families, starting with our children, starting with our neighbors, starting with our co-workers, of sharing the message of Jesus and helping other people walk toward him, walk with him. So this is a huge problem. In our area, within about 40 minutes of our house, there are 3 churches that we fellowship with that don't have a pastor. So one of the things that we're praying toward in this next term is how can we work with those 3 churches and then 2 Japanese pastors that we know? Is there a way that we can work together to help them do more than tread water? Because right now that's what they're doing. They're just treading water. One of the churches, twice a month, they listen to an MP3 sermon. And if you've never done that, can you imagine sitting here where you are now and you're just looking toward the front and you see this and you're just listening to an audio sermon? And if it was an awesome speaker, it would be tolerable. If he's only average and not really good at keeping your attention, it's very painful. And Cameron and I went to visit that church on one of those Sundays. It was very painful. So at the least, we feel like there are enough men in these churches, if some of them would commit to being discipled and being worked with, that we could have an actual person standing there, that we could have a plan going forward instead of random messages. Every Sunday's different because it depends on what they're listening to, who shows up from another church to preach. I think there's a way we could do that better. We could help them more. So some kind of church network is kind of the idea. I don't know what we'd call it or how that would work or if they'd be willing. But if you look at, I was reading in Titus this week, just in my devotions, and Paul told Titus to appoint elders in every town. So maybe that's what's needed. We need to look at Kumoto as there's a church here, and we need to have some elders who will help guide these local expressions of the church so that they can actually go forward and reach their neighbors and disciple the men in the church so that they can be leaders. So that's another big part of ministry going forward. In all of these, the common theme is discipling people. So I have a simple message for you today, simple to understand. But like many of the messages in the Bible, many of the lessons are very simple to understand, but they're very hard to practice. Matthew 4:19 is a verse that you're probably familiar with. And this is where Jesus is beginning to call his first disciples. And he saw in verse 18 the two brothers, Simon Peter and Andrew, and they're fishing. So they're busy, they're at work, they're making a living. And Jesus looked at them in verse 19 and he said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." There are three ideas in there that we are meant to practice that are life-changing. Actually, two of them we're meant to practice, one of them that Jesus does. Follow me. That's a simple phrase. If you ask any child that left for the children's church, what does it mean to follow somebody? They could tell you. Oh, it's a simple concept. They're going this way. I'm going to go behind them, and I'm going to follow and go the direction they're going. You ever played Simon Says? Very similar. We could play Simon Says, and everybody would know what we mean. Hey, do what I do. That's what Jesus said. Follow me. So it's a simple concept, but it's one that takes a lot of thought and a lot of effort for you to live it out. What does it mean in the world today for you to follow Jesus? Oh, this one it starts to get hard because there are three parts of following Jesus. One is your head. There's knowledge that you need. You need to understand what God's word says. You need to know what Jesus said. You need to know what Jesus believed. You need to know what Jesus did. You need to know how Jesus did it. There's knowledge that you need. And that's primarily when you come to church and you're sitting here and you listen to messages, you're getting knowledge. That's one part of the whole. That's only one part. And by itself, if that's all you get, it's not enough. But you have to have it. The Bible is that foundation that we build our lives on. The second part is our heart. You need to know that, know what God said. You need to believe it. You need to understand it, to believe it, so your heart changes as you begin to think differently, as you begin to look at the world differently, and then that works out in your hands. You need to live differently. And it's interesting the way this works. He says, "Follow me," and then he said, "I will make you." Not that you will make yourself. We're in the self-help world, right? If you go to the self-help section of any bookstore, do they still have bookstores? Maybe it's all online. Go to the Amazon and type in self-help, and you're going to get lots of books, right? This is not self-help. He says the part that you need to do is follow me. And if you follow me, I will make you. It's not I might, I'll consider it, I'll test you and see if you're worthy. He says, if you follow me, this is what I will do in your life. Follow me, and I will make you. That speaks to transformation, to change, to progress, not perfection. That's one of the things problems we have in the church often. So, well, I can't do it perfect yet, so I need to not do it. Well, no, the process is what changes you. And the process is where you're following, you're committing your head, your heart, and your hands to follow Jesus, to act in the way that he acted, to believe what he believed, to relate to people the way that he did. And in doing that, you change. But he changes you from the heart out. And he changes you into something specific. Fishers of men. You can go back and you can look throughout the New Testament, and we're not going to take the time to look at all the passages today, but Matthew 28, 18, 19, 20 talks about making disciples of the nations. It's attaching ourselves to the mission of Jesus. He came for a very specific purpose. And it's really interesting that he says, before he went to the cross, I finished my task. And I think that was to disciple the disciples, to prepare them to be that foundation for the church, to take that message. So he prepared them so that once he had returned to the Father's side and sent them the Holy Spirit, that they were prepared to take that message of salvation, to take his mission to the world, to be fishers of men. And I love the way that Paul puts it. He says, we are ambassadors for Christ. You know, in the world today, we're an international society. There are people even today from multiple different countries, multiple different states, multiple different parts of the world. And we know as people travel, as the countries interact, we have ambassadors. What do ambassadors do? The ambassador from the United States doesn't come to Japan, for instance, and just say whatever he wants to say. He's carrying a message, an official message from the United States government. It's not his message, it's the government's message. He doesn't have to believe it or agree with it. He just has to present that message. And if he doesn't do that, he won't be an ambassador for very long. Paul said, we're an ambassador for Christ. That means it's not our message, it's his message. It's our role in his mission to carry his message to the nations, to be disciple makers. And that carries two ideas. One is it's the what, we're the ambassadors carrying his message. It's also the how, because he showed us how disciples are made. That's something we often don't think about enough, don't consider enough, and we don't consider who's supposed to be doing it. You know, too many of us as the church today really look at the disciple makers, what needs to be the pastors and the deacons and the Sunday school teachers, and we just kind of support them. Go, pastor, go. That's not it. Look at Ephesians 4 and say, what is the role of your pastor and your leaders in your church? Their role is to prepare you, to equip you for ministry. What is ministry? To be an ambassador for Christ, to be a disciple maker. So when we look at this passage where it says, follow me and I will make you fishers of men, understand that that's what Jesus is intending for you to do. To follow him, you become a disciple. You commit your life to becoming like his, to understanding what he understood, to believing it, to understanding the need for each person to know him. He is the door. He is the truth. He is the way. He is the message. And as we follow him, we are changed and we take his message to those around us. Follow me and I will make you fishers of men. So we look at that. None of those words are difficult. You know, every third grader that just left or second grader could read that and probably could give you at least an idea of what it means. Now, you say fishers of men, they might not understand that that's attached to discipleship and being ambassadors, but it means catching, fishing, you catch fish, fishing for men, catching men. They would understand the basic concepts taught there. It's not complicated. Too often we make our Christianity complicated. It's very simple. It's just hard to do. Why is it hard to do? Well, Jesus said, deny me, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. And that's where we have problems. Deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. We are at heart selfish. So when Jesus said, follow me, we go, yeah, but I want to do this. You're not going the way that I want to go. I want to go over here. This seems more fun. So we understand the concept. I should love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. But I don't. I love myself with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. That is at core where most of us are. We love ourselves more than we love God. We want to do what we want to do more than we want to follow Jesus. We want to do church in a way that's comfortable for us, not in a way that's actually making disciples, because that requires us to be open, to be transparent, to be involved in a relationship with someone who might hurt us. It's difficult. It's not complicated, it's just difficult. So we struggle. What we need in Japan are disciple makers. What you need in Rochester are disciple makers. What you need in this church is disciple makers. That means you're committed to investing in the lives of someone else and helping them, walking with them to follow Jesus. What does it mean to follow Jesus? It's one of the questions that we need to be having. We often want to discuss deep theological things or passages that are obscure when we should be asking, how do we obey the simple commands? What does it mean to follow Jesus? What does that look like in my life? We talk about a couple of key things often, and we don't really think deeply about it, though. So, well, you should be praying, you should be in God's Word, and you should be in fellowship with the church. Now, those are core things for any believer. What does it mean to pray? How do you pray? Do we talk about together? Do we pray together? Do we talk about what it means to pray? How can we pray better? How can we pray more? Paul said, pray without ceasing. Does that mean pray every second of every day? How do we do that? How do we live that out? We should be talking about that with people in our church. What does it mean to really understand and know God's Word? To know Jesus and to know what was important to Him. How do we do that? How are we doing in our Bible reading, in our study, in our Bible memorization? You know, if we could ask this morning, say, how many people are consistently, say at least 5 days a week, reading your Bible? Probably a fair number of people would be, but there's probably a fair number of people in a group this size, they're saying, yeah, I really struggle to read consistently. Are we helping each other with that? Is that a conversation you're having? Is somebody asking you, hey, how are you doing in your reading? What are you reading now? What's God teaching you? We all need that conversation. That's part of making disciples. That's part of being a disciple. We're helping each other know what God said and to live it out. So it's not just, what are you reading? It's what are you learning? How are you applying that? How can I help you live out the things God's teaching you? We need that conversation. I need that conversation. It's one of the reasons we pray for coworkers. I need coworkers because I need somebody to come to me and say, hey, Norman, how are you doing? How can I help you live out a life of following Jesus here in Japan? It's not rocket science. It's not complicated. It's just hard. It takes a change of priorities. It takes being intentional. You know, too often we flow with the day, whatever comes. But to be a disciple maker, look at what Jesus did. He would get up early and go out places where people weren't because he needed to spend that time in prayer. And he knew if I don't get started early before people come knocking at your door, well, you go wherever the day goes. And the days get busy. But he made a priority to seek God first. He knew what God had to say, and he put that first. The question for us as a church, the question for each one of us as an individual, where are your priorities? Is your priority to be a disciple maker? If it is a simple test, and I actually haven't ever gone and looked through this, but I tell people, you could bring your calendar and your checkbook to church, and we could compare and be very quick to understand where your priorities are. Because your calendar and your checkbook will tell you. You cannot be a disciple maker and not give God time and give other people time. So if you're too busy, you can't do it. It's a priority. So, well, but I've got commitments. Exactly. That is exactly what I'm saying. If you've accepted Christ, you've got commitments. You've got responsibilities. You've got priorities. Are they reflected in your calendar and in your checkbook? If they're not, then be honest with yourself and say, yeah, I'm not really following Jesus. I may, in theory, know what that means, but I'm not doing it. It takes time. It takes intentional effort. You're not going to be perfect at it. No one's going to be perfect at it, but you need to try. And the try is to put that on your calendar, to schedule that meeting with people who will help you to grow, to schedule that meeting with people who you need to help grow. It's not complicated. Making disciples is not complicated. The information that we need to know is not complicated. It's just hard to live. So we pray for us as we go back to Japan in January that we will do this. We have friends that we know who are some internationals, some Japanese, who need to be confronted with the truth that God does exist, and it is important, it is relevant. And I make choices in my life based on this truth. I'm here in Japan because of this message that Jesus came to seek and to save the lost, and there is no other way to God except through him. I believe that with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. If you've heard my testimony before, I tell you that there was a man that stood up at our church in Ames, Iowa, that he stood up at the end of his testimony. He was from a country where there weren't a lot of Christians, and he said, hey, if you're here in Ames, Iowa, and you believe this is true, why are you here? Why are you in this town when anybody in this town, in 5 minutes, they can hear the gospel if they want to? They can find a Bible if they want to. They can be at a church and talk to a pastor if they want to. Why are you here when there's so many countries like mine where I searched for God for 10 years and never met a Christian, never saw a Bible, never heard the gospel? Why are you here? And I answered that question with, good question. It took me about 6 months to answer that. But in that 6 months, God changed my life because I went from, well, I've never considered that. I was about to finish a PhD at Iowa State. But I stopped and said, God, is this what you want for me? If this is the right place, I want to be behind it 100%, and I want you to use this. But if this is not the right place, show me where. And when I started looking for God's path, he started changing my path. Now we've been in Japan for 20 years. So God changed my life through a man who stood up and said, why are you here? So that's where I'm going to close today. Jesus said, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. So this morning, why are you here? Why are you at this church? Why are you in Rochester? Why do you live and breathe? Why did God create you? Why did Jesus save you? Why are you here? And I'll challenge you, if you answer that reason without attaching that to Jesus, to his call in your life, then you need to go back and re-examine. The calling for every single one of us is to be a disciple maker. You should be able to answer, my reason for being here, my reason for working at this job, for living this life, for living in this town, is because this is the place and this is the way that God intends for me to honor and glorify him as I make disciples who point other people to Jesus. Let's pray.